Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. Today we will be taking a deep dive into the details of what could have been the biggest war in history, all because of some silly miscommunication. Have you ever wondered about what all of the drama between the United States and the Soviet Union was? Well, one specific part of that drama was the Cuban Missile Crisis. The crazy story of the Cuban Missile Crisis started on October 14th, 1962. Tensions were already high between the United States and the Soviet Union, with people of both nations living in extreme fear of being fatally attacked. Today, we will trace the crisis through its timeline of key events and the people involved, and examine how it impacted citizens, governments, and the world, as well as the lasting impacts we still see today. Now let's walk through the key events of the crisis. Lasting 13 days in October 1962, it brought the world closer and closer to a nuclear war. October 14th was the day everything started, with the US biplane flying over Cuba, capturing photos of Soviet nuclear missile sites being constructed. These did not appear as defensive weapons, but were missiles that could hit major US cities in under minutes. Just 2 days later, on October 16th, President John F. Kennedy was briefed. After he was briefed, the situation became urgent and highly secretive. Kennedy proceeded by gathering a team of top advisors to help figure out what they should do next, with their options ranging from doing nothing to launching a full-on invasion of Cuba. On October 22nd, Kennedy went public, informing the American people of the missiles and announced a naval blockade around Cuba. This meant that the US Navy would stop Soviet ships from delivering more weapons to Cuba. By October 24th, Soviet ships reached the blockade. This was such an important moment because if they were to keep going, it could launch direct military conflict. Surprisingly, many of the ships slowed down or turned back, buying more time. Then came October 27th, often referred to as Black Saturday. This was the most crucial and dangerous part of the entire crisis. A US biplane was shot down over Cuba, with tension rising to its peak. It seemed like nuclear war could break out at any second. However, the United States and Soviet Union were working on piecing together an agreement. To help better understand the Cuban Missile Crisis, we need to take a better look at the key people involved who held everyone's safety in their hands, making the important decisions behind the scenes. First, President John F. Kennedy was the leader of the United States at this time, taking control of the decisions being made in the United States. President Kennedy needed to carefully come up with a plan to resolve these issues between the United States and the Soviet Union without accidentally starting a nuclear war. Kennedy strategically chose to use a naval blockade, preventing the Soviet Union from delivering offensive weapons to Cuba, always having a peaceful resolution in mind, especially under the immense pressure. Next up, we have Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union. Khrushchev was responsible for the missiles being placed in Cuba from the Soviet Union, with an intention of protecting Cuba and bettering the position of the Soviet Union, bringing the world extremely close to nuclear war because of the actions and decisions he made. One other important key figure is Fidel Castro, the leader of Cuba. After the United States tried to overthrow Castro in the Bay of Pigs, he turned straight to the Soviet Union for its protection. Castro made his country right in the middle of the crisis, doing so by letting the Soviet Union place all of these missiles to be placed right in Cuba. Each and every one of these leaders made critical decisions that shaped the outcome of the crisis. as well as ultimately helping avoid nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis did not only affect world leaders, but had a much larger impact on everyone in their lives, on different government decisions, as well as the rest of the world. Here in the United States, citizens were severely impacted by the crisis. There were so many innocent people terrified of what may or may not happen, terrified that nuclear war could break out at any particular moment. Many families tried to protect themselves as well as their children through drills. These drills taught them what they should do if nuclear war were in fact to break out. Citizens were severely anxious and stressed during this time period because they knew if nuclear war were to break out that it could lead to terrible, devastating things. The United States government was also impacted by the crisis and changed the way they handled things moving forward. The United States government changed the way they handled nuclear threats as well as foreign policy. They also set up a direct communication line with the Soviet Union, that way there wouldn't be any more misunderstandings. Coming out of this frightening time pushed the United States to make decisions way more carefully. For the rest of the world, the Cuban Missile Crisis showed how dangerous the Cold War was, made other countries aware of the risk of nuclear war, and pushed leaders to avoid getting put in situations where there was even the possibility of nuclear war. After the United States and the Soviet Union solved this crisis and came up with a plan to not let something like this ever happen again, it eased the tension all around. After all, the Cuban Missile Crisis was a turning point for several things. Not just the Cold War, but also how the world deals with these conflicts and nuclear threats. Even though the Cuban Missile Crisis only lasted 13 days, all of the effects lasted much longer, changing the way countries deal with conflict and the way the world works as a whole. It led to wanting to have much more control over nuclear weapons, as well as having clear communication to avoid misunderstandings. One thing that stood out to me the most is how close the world came to nuclear war in just a short amount of time. Seeing how terrifying this crisis was, it is extremely scary to think that there are still nuclear weapons in the world today. Thinking back on how close the decision was to launch the missiles, it shows the importance of communication and how important clear communication is to avoid misunderstandings like these. Connecting to today's day and age, there are still conflicts going on all of the time. Although this crisis enforced better communication systems to be put into place, helping keep these conflicts calm and controlled rather than escalating to the point in which they did during this crisis. Overall, we can take away the fact that it is extremely important for our leaders and the people making these big decisions to stay calm and collected before making irrational decisions. The Cuban Missile Crisis shows us that even in the most intense and dangerous situations, as long as careful decisions and clear communication are at play, then everyone will be safe and avoid these disasters. Thank you guys for listening to today's podcast episode, and I hope everyone was able to learn something new today. See you guys later.